Hello, my name is Darren Thomas, and I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques.com. In this video, we're going to take a look at a term that is commonly used in assessment, and that's something that I'm particularly familiar with in my experience with TESOL, and that is direct and indirect test items. Let's take a closer look at this. So, a direct item is some sort of an item or a question that you use in assessment where the student has to complete an authentic action. I will explain that more in a minute. An indirect item in many ways is the opposite of a direct item. You measure a student's knowledge about a subject, but you don't necessarily have them do something. Primarily with indirect, they're trying to recall or reproduce something. Let's take a closer look at direct item before I talk even more about indirect. So here are some common examples of direct item. Now, as you know, in TESOL and language teaching, you have the four primary skills: speaking, writing, reading, and listening. And so here on this screen, we have an example of a direct item for one of each of the four commonly developed skills in language. So for speaking, examples of direct items is interview and presentation. If you can perform an interview in terms of answering questions, obviously you are speaking. And the same thing applies for presentation. If you're able to present information, that is an excellent direct indicator of speaking. For writing, writing essay questions or writing an essay, whatever, those are other ways to address that. For reading, there's many ways you can do this. You can have the students read material and they can respond to questions verbally or in writing. And of course, for listening, if students are able to complete oral directions in order to, fulfill a task, that's an example. Now, keep in mind that these examples here, they're not mutually exclusive. For example, interviews, when the student is listening during an interview, you might want to put that under the listening category. And of course, when they're speaking, they're in the speaking category, etc. These are not mutually exclusive tasks under these different domains that I'm showing you here. The point is this, is that when you want to assess directly, you must have the students do something in which they are interacting and impacting the environment around them. That is the primary goal of direct items. It is to try to replicate real world experiences by actually doing something. Now, having said that, we're going to move now to indirect items. There are, of course, at least four different ways that you can do indirect items. And that is multiple choice, closed items, paraphrasing, and sentence reordering. These are the ones that are commonly used in language testing, language assessment. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about multiple choice questioning because that is kind of the default manner in which many teachers approach assessment, so there's not a whole lot for me to add to the conversation. So instead, I'm going to focus on the last three: closed item, paraphrasing, and sentence reordering. So here's an example of closed item or closed items. What happens here is that you as a teacher develop either a sentence or a paragraph, and the student's job is to fill in the blanks with an appropriate response. Now, the problem with that is that the response can be one of many things, which can be very frustrating when you have to mark. So here's an example. Smiling, Tom said that he blanked the cake. Sarah smiled and gave him a blank. Now, there are many different ways that the student can answer this question. The student could say that Tom hates the cake, as an example. So hates, trying to spell here with the mouse. So even though he's smiling, the student said no, he hates it. And then Sarah smiles and gave him a punch. So, we're not trying to be too sarcastic here, but the point is that it can get pretty messy when you do close. It's subjective, and you as a teacher have to determine if the words they put in the blank are appropriate for the context of the sentence. So technically, my answer here is appropriate, even if it's not the most polite way to, fulfill the sentence. A second way that you can assess students indirectly is through the ideal of paraphrasing. So under my first little dash here, I have a sentence. Under the second dash, I have the beginning of a phrase and then a blank. And what the student has to do here is he has to take the first phrase, I am sorry, I did not go to the assembly, and he must rephrase that, paraphrase that, by beginning the sentence with I wish. So he might say, I wish I had gone to the assembly, as another way of rephrasing this. So again, this kind of has the same challenge as the closed item, is that there's many different ways that the student can approach answering this question or rephrasing this item, if you will. and the teacher must judge for themselves if it is appropriate. Very difficult, but again, you are trying to test them indirectly. That's what's happening here. Now, our last one here is sentence reordering. And that is when the student has to take a sentence that is out of order. So here's my out of order sentence right here, the first bullet, and they have to put it in proper order. So cat the store goes to. Now in English, that doesn't make any sense at all. But when you rephrase it, the cat goes to the store. That is the correct answer. Now, sentence reordering is a little bit more specific in that often there's only one answer, but not necessarily, but usually there's only one answer. Now, you have to remember that with indirect items, you are giving them tasks that maybe they won't have to do in the real world. In my experience as a native English speaker, I rarely have to reorder sentences. That is something I don't normally do. And also for many students who are learning English in the real world, they don't often have to reorder sentences in the real world. However, this is testing their ability to understand the subject, verb, object order and to also assess their vocabulary. But all this is happening indirectly. Whereas again, when we talked about direct items earlier, if I have an interview with the student, that is very realistic. And that's why it is considered direct. Now, in conclusion, I just want to recap what we've talked about in this particular video. We took a look at direct items, which are things that measure students' performance through authentic assessment, authentic task. And we also looked at indirect items, which measures the student's knowledge of a subject matter. Now with direct items, you have many choices. We talked about for reading, writing, listening, and speaking, the different things, essay questions, presentation, interviews, etc. Those are different ways to measure students' performance authentically. And with indirect, we talked a little bit about closed items, reordering, and also paraphrasing. So, my name is Derek Thomas. We want to thank you for watching this video, and I hope that this was useful for you. Thank you for listening.